Well, good morning, and I welcome you to our service or sermon from East Union Christian Church for Sunday, March 13th. We had a kind of an unexpected storm that has made things pretty difficult traveling up and around the church, and so the decision was made to not have in-person services on this day. So I hope that you're enjoying your time, that you're staying warm, and that you'll enjoy the message this morning as we continue our journey with Jesus in 2022. This morning, I'm going to be continuing this message, or these series of messages, on the final week of Jesus' life, and I'm going to be asking you, what do you produce? What do you produce? From Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 14, and also verses 20 through 25. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely not the world's best gardener or arborist. Stephanie just loves to go out and get these ferns or some other plant in the spring or early summer for our front porch, and I almost cringe every time she does so, because I know that as soon as I touch those things, or as soon as I'm around them, they're going to start dying. And it's not long until those plants, those beautiful green plants, start turning brown, and we end up growing them and then throwing them in the garbage can. Then a few years ago, I put a tree or a bush or something, I don't remember what it was now, in our backyard, and it didn't even last a summer. I don't know why, but I'll just put it this way. I'm not exactly someone with a green thumb when it comes to having ornamentals. I'm a farm guy. And when I had a farm, I turned out some great crops, and I knew what I was doing with cattle, so I know I did some things right. But when it comes to gardening and ornamentals, I'm just not very good at it. And sometimes it's frustrating, you might say. But there's something in common, though, between those people who have a green thumb and those who raise cattle, or those who raise hogs, or anything else. It might be a plant or an animal. It's got to produce. I had cattle, and if I had a cow who didn't produce enough milk for her calves to grow, or she didn't produce good calves, I'll obviously sent her to market because she was not doing me a lot of good. And I thought about, as I was preparing this message, one of the saddest days I had in running a farm was I bought this very nice Hereford heifer. Had some great bloodlines. We took her out on the show circuit, and she did great on the show circuit. But we tried to breed her several times, and she never could breed. And we finally came to the realization that she had a genetic defect and could not breed. And so this beautiful heifer ended up, I sent her to the stockyards. And yes, when we loaded her up that day, I cried, because it was such a beautiful animal, but she was not producing for me. Jesus talked about bearing fruit. He talked about producing. He expected his people to figuratively bear fruit for him. Just like it'd be natural for an apple tree to produce apples, or for a tomato plant to produce tomatoes, or for a cow to produce milk and good offspring, Christians are expected to produce fruit. And that's a lesson that Jesus gives over and over throughout his ministry. And the incident we're going to look at today is extremely powerful. And it happened on the Monday of the final week of his ministry. And what Jesus was teaching us in this message, or in this passage we're going to be looking at here in a few minutes, is that we should develop our lives, and we should develop our church to bear fruit. Now, the passage we're going to be looking at today is very interesting, because Jesus uses an event to teach about a lesson that is as pertinent to us today as it was to his disciples nearly 2,000 years ago. he presented this lesson that's really not hard to grasp, and one that the implementation of it should just be natural. Now I want to give you a little background. If you remember last week, I said I'd be looking at different events in the last life or the last week of Jesus' earthly life up to Easter Sunday. I believe there's more events listed in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John than I could possibly ever cover in a few 25 to 30 minute sermons. And there's a lot of things that I'm skipping over that I just can't get it all in the time that we have. But I hope that all of these times, I hope that all of these messages and that your daily Bible reading will help you draw closer to Jesus and develop that strong relationship with Him. Because as always, everything we do should be about Jesus. It should be about Him. And this year I've asked you to make it a journey with Jesus. And everything we do has got to be about Him. Now today I want to read from Mark chapter 11. I have three ideas that I think we can glean from Mark chapter 11 verses 12 through 14 and also verses 20 through 25. And I want you to read these together with me. Starting in verse 12. The next day as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. Then skipping down to verse 20. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from its roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. "Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins." Folks, there's several ideas in here that I want you to look at today that we're going to be seeing, and I hope that you will implement them in your everyday lives. One is that Jesus expects us. Jesus expects our fruit to show. The world experiences our fruit or expects it as well. And Jesus expects our faith to live. So the first thing I want you to think about this morning is Jesus expects our fruit to show. That's something I talk about a lot. You know, I talk a lot about being saved by grace through faith. And we know that the Bible, or the New Testament, teaches that baptism is the time in which God acts on our faith. And we're told also in Ephesians chapter 2:10 that we are saved unto good works. In other words, if we have been saved, we are naturally going to show our relationship with Christ. I can't preach that enough. That it's natural. That if you're saved, you're going to be saved unto good works. That it's going to be a natural outgrowth of your relationship to Christ. But I want you to look at what happened in the text that we just read. Mark says that Jesus was leaving Bethany and was hungry. So Jesus saw a fig tree and went to see if it had some fruit. Now there was some confusion maybe amongst people when they're trying to interpret this passage, because it specifically says that it was not the season for figs. Now folks, Jesus knew that. Jesus lived in the area. Not only that, he is the Son of God, he was all-knowing. Jesus knew it was not the time of figs, and everyone noted that. Mark even went so far as to say, again, it was not the season. But Jesus was teaching a lesson. He was teaching a lesson, and he was using his own hunger and the surroundings around him to teach a lesson about living for him, living for God. Jesus used this to warn about judgment of Jerusalem, and he had accused many of the Jews of just honoring God with their lips and not with their hearts. If you look at Mark chapter 7, if you back up a little bit, Mark chapter 7 verses 6 and 7, Jesus was quoting from Isaiah chapter 29 when he says, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." And then back up here into Mark chapter 11, what do you see Jesus doing? He went to this fig tree and there was no figs on it, so he cursed the tree. Look at verse again of 14. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. Now there would be some that would say, "Oh, come on, Jesus, you're being unfair. This was not the season for figs. Why should this tree have figs on it? It's not the season, and yet you're still cursing it." That misses the point of what Jesus was doing here. If you back up to verse 13, we read, he says, "When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves," because it was not the season for figs. When he reached it, he found what? Nothing but leaves. The Jews, I believe, could be likened to this. They can be likened to this tree with an abundance of leaves, but no fruit. In the few verses we skipped over, in verses 15 through 19, in Mark chapter 11, Jesus went to the temple and he cleansed it. He went in there and overturned the tables of the money changers and all. This was the second time he'd done that. And a few weeks ago I preached about the first time. So I didn't want to go through that again. But he did the same thing. And he went through there and he said, "Those people have made his Father's house a den of robbers." So there's a correlation here. He said, in the temple, those people were doing wrong, and he's saying it's just like this tree that has all kind of leaves, yet it doesn't have fruit. And there's a real application for us today. Are we like those trees that have the leaves with no figs? Are we full of leaves and have no figs? Do we look like we're really producing for the Lord, but really have nothing to show for it? Our society has so many illustrations of that. Of having a lot of things to show, but nothing to show for it. Maybe, I talk about fakey people. There are people I can spot a mile off, and many of you can as well. They have all kind of fluff and all, but when it comes down to what's inside, there's really nothing there. In the country, we talk about the guy who always has that cowboy hat, but he couldn't tell you the difference between a bull or a steer or a heifer. In other words, it's used to describe somebody that's got a great show but not much substance. What's that saying? You've probably heard it. He is all hat and no cattle. All hat, no cattle. And that might be what Jesus was saying about many people in their Christian life. He was saying they were all leaves and no figs. Folks, what does Jesus expect? He expects fruit. He expects fruit from all of us. If you want to look at what Jesus expects, think about what Paul wrote in the New Testament. In Galatians chapter 5, a very familiar passage of Scripture, Galatians chapter 5, starting at verse 22, we're told about the fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Read that again. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's what Jesus expects from us. But the second thing I want to remind you of is that the world expects us also to bear fruit. Now you might say, why would that matter what the world thinks? Why does that matter? Jesus knows, and that's all that matters. And when we say that, folks, that might be true, but it misses the point that that this passage in Mark is making, that Jesus made. Look at Mark chapter 11, verses 20 and 21. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from its roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered. Jesus was using this as a teaching moment. You see, this incident of observing the fig tree gave Jesus an opportunity to speak about a lesson that he wanted his disciples to learn very clearly. When the disciples and Jesus passed by the very next morning, they saw that the tree was withered all the way to its roots. Peter saw it and mentioned it. Now, folks, I don't know if Peter was just making a declarative statement or a statement out of wonder or surprise. Either way, you're strong enough to make a comment. But you've seen when trees die, it takes forever. Seems like it takes a long time. But Peter and the apostles went by one that Jesus had just cursed the day before, and they noticed the very next day it was totally withered up. Jesus had cursed this fig tree because it was full of leaves, yet it had no fruit. And it was withered all the way to its roots. You know, I could have named this point, instead of the world expects us to produce fruit, I could have named this point along the line of something along, well, Jesus punishes those who have no fruit, or something along that line, and that would have been accurate. But I think there's more to it. You know, Peter here noticed that that tree had died. I think it's probably what I was just talking about, that it happened so quickly. But it's a principle for us. And the principle is that when we don't produce fruit, people notice. If you don't believe me, I challenge you to look at what happens when a prominent Christian person messes up. What happens? It's all over the news. Even if someone doesn't quote unquote mess up, but is living a lifestyle that doesn't seem consistent with the Christian values that are listed in the Bible, people talk about it. Think of the television preachers who are living in multi-million-dollar homes, or owning a Mercedes and private planes and all. And people jump all over that because it doesn't seem to coincide, or it doesn't seem to jive with what is written in the Bible about sharing with the poor and such as that. I think about what Jesus said. Jesus talked about false prophets. Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 through 20, he said, by their, what? You will recognize them. By their fruit, you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 through 20. Now, given the same, that Jesus is using the same kind of illustration, I think he's talking about everybody here. Obviously, in the context, he's talking about false prophets. But I believe that given the fact that he uses the same illustration that can be applied to everyone, I believe that principle is true for all people. And folks, let me assure you that if you're a Christian, the world is watching you. Other Christians are watching you, and the world is watching you. Folks, I love this time of year. I love the basketball tournaments. And of course, if you've talked to me or seen me on Facebook or whatever, you know that I do that. I think there's so much reflection of life, though, in team sports, because you see the winners rejoice and the teams that lose weep because their dreams die, and we can relate to that. But also because they know that that exact team is never going to be back together again. But you can also see how people react and how people act under pressure. Several weeks ago, Stephanie and I were at a basketball game, and I won't say who it was. We were at a basketball game, and one of the coaches was just throughout the entire game constantly berating the officials. He was really upset and just constantly berating. And late in the game, he was so upset, he ran out on the floor, was fussing at the officials, actually fussed at some of the players on the other team. And I was almost embarrassed for his team. And you know, the thing is, I know people in that area. I saw a picture of that same coach praying with his team. Now, I'm not here to judge. I mean, he may have lost it. I don't know what happened. But which picture do you think I remember the most? The picture of him praying with his team, or the picture I saw of him running out and having very unchristian character in front of a large crowd of people? Folks, that illustrates that people are watching you, whether we like it or not. And we have to bear fruit for Jesus Christ. We can say all the right words at the right times. We can be in church every time the door is open. We can sing in public. We can pray in public. We can do all the things that look good. We can have all the leaves on our spiritual trees. But without producing fruit, it's useless. Jesus was oftentimes criticizing the Jewish religious leaders who liked to pray so people would see them, where people would hear them. They'd wear the robes and the ornaments and the jewelry, but they didn't love and forgive, and they didn't have real faith. Do we sometimes fit those very descriptions? If you want to impact the world, bear fruit. Forgive those who hurt you, and folks, that's tough. Rely on God. Love people. Remember what we just read a few minutes ago? But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Okay, let me repeat that for you. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. That leads us to our third and final point this morning, that Jesus expects our faith to live. Jesus expects our faith to live. I want you to read along with me in Mark chapter 11, verses 23 through 35, or 23 through 25 again. Have faith in God, Jesus answered. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you received it, and it will be yours. And when you start praying, or when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. I'll be honest with you, sometimes I struggle on these fronts. You know, I have faith, but sometimes there's mountains in front of me. It would be nice and easy to say, well, I just say I believe and those mountains just disappear, but that doesn't always happen. And then I see people saying, well, I wanted a new car, I wanted a new house, I wanted something new, and I prayed about it and I got it. It's not that I doubt, but I've never had anything dramatic like that happen in my life. And I don't believe that that's the mark of true faith. I wonder if sometimes we don't look at these verses through some selfish eyes and miss what Jesus is saying. He said, have faith in God. And if you think about it, that's the summary of Jesus' ministry. That Jesus' entire life was devoted to telling people that they should have faith in God. He encouraged people to have faith in God. He says, cast the mountain into the sea. Now, whether Jesus meant for that statement to be taken literally or figuratively, I'm not here to debate that at this point this morning. What I will say is that it's a great, great picture. And one of the commentaries that I was reading for this message said, the extreme character of Jesus' language may have no greater purpose than dramatically to call attention to the reality of and need for genuine faith. In other words, this exhortation to faith should be saying it's within God's will. That we should live our lives in God's will and have faith that God will lead us, that God will take care of us, and God will do what He wants. It's not a broad statement to say that we get what we want, but it's an expression that says that we have faith, and it talks about our own relationship with God, and that whatever we do must be done in relation to Him. Then Jesus said in the last verse there, He said to forgive others. That should be our prayer. That we be able to forgive others. Because we're told in the Bible that God's forgiveness of us is reflected in our ability and willingness to forgive others. If you remember Jesus' parable, there was a rich man. Or a man, I wouldn't say he was rich, but there was a man who owned a great debt to a master. Let's just throw out a number here, maybe $1 million. He had a great debt, and that debt was forgiven. Yet somebody owed him a small amount, maybe $50 or $100, and he wouldn't forgive them. The master then refused to forgive the man, called him wicked. You know, that's a picture of us. We have a great debt, the debt of sin, that Jesus has paid. We couldn't pay it back. We need to forgive others those little things they do for us. And it's sometimes difficult. Somebody does this wrong and will say, I'll never speak to that person again. Or I'll forgive them, but I'll never forget. And if that's our attitude, then we haven't forgiven. Folks, as I close this morning, we like to talk about what our salvation has done for us, and we should, because Jesus has paid a debt that we couldn't pay. And we should celebrate that every day of our lives. But we have a responsibility to show our fruit, to live our fruit, and do that in forgiving others. Following Christ is not just saying the right things and doing the right things so that the world will know something about us. But it's living a life that following Christ with love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's a life that lets others know who Jesus is. Let's bear fruit for Him. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Love you very much. See you next week at East Union Christian Church. Have a great week.